Mike Tyson slammed his gloved fists against the locker room door and refused to walk to the ring until someone found the soldier who'd been dragged out of the arena. Security scrambled in every direction as the heavyweight champion of the world stood barefoot in the corridor, blocking the entire event with his body. What happened in the next 45 minutes would become boxing legend, a story whispered about for decades. Mike Tyson's fist was already cocked when the door to his dressing room swung open and a man he'd never seen before stepped inside without knocking. The stranger wore a military dress uniform with a chest full of medals, and he walked straight toward Tyson like he had every right to be there. What happened in the next 48 hours would become boxing legend, a story whispered about for decades in gyms from Brooklyn to Las Vegas, in military barracks overseas, and in the private rooms where promoters cut deals they never want the public to see. Now let me set this up properly, because the surface story, the one that made the rounds on sports blogs years later, that story only scratches what actually went down. The real version involves a banned war hero, a crooked venue manager, a confrontation that almost derailed a major fight card, and Mike Tyson doing something so unexpected that the people who witnessed it still talk about it with a kind of reverence. The year was 1988. Tyson was the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, 21 years old, undefeated. He wasn't just winning fights, he was ending men, average knockout time under the first round. Opponents were collecting their paychecks and privately hoping for a miracle or a quick ending. Believe me, when Iron Mike was at his peak, there was no scarier human being on the planet Earth wearing boxing gloves. The fight in question was scheduled for Atlantic City, a routine defense. Tyson's opponent doesn't even matter for this story because the real drama had nothing to do with what happened inside the ring. It had everything to do with what happened outside it. 3 days before fight night, a man named Staff Sergeant Raymond Vickers arrived in Atlantic City by bus. Vickers had just returned stateside from a deployment that had left him with a bronze star, a Purple Heart, and a pronounced limp in his right leg from shrapnel that the surgeons decided was safer to leave in than to pull out. He was 34 years old, square jaw, quiet eyes, hands that stayed steady no matter what. He'd used his combat pay and a chunk of his savings to buy a ringside ticket to watch his hero fight. Here's what nobody tells you. Vickers had grown up in Brownsville. Same neighborhood as Tyson, same broken streets, same concrete basketball courts with bent rims. He'd watched Tyson's rise from a troubled kid to the youngest heavyweight champion in history, and it had meant something to him. Not in a sentimental poster on the wall kind of way. In a deep, gut-level, one-of-us-made-it kind of way. The kind of connection that makes a man spend money he doesn't really have on a ringside seat. So Vickers showed up at the venue the afternoon before the fight to pick up his ticket at will call. He was wearing civilian clothes. Jeans, a clean button-down shirt, his military ID in his wallet. He walked up to the window, gave his name, and waited. The woman behind the glass typed something into her computer. Then she typed again. Then she picked up a phone and spoke quietly into it with her hand covering the receiver. Vickers felt something shift. He leaned forward. She hung up and told him there was a problem with his ticket and that someone would be out to speak with him. Get this. The someone who came out was a man named Gerald Panetti. Panetti was the venue's head of operations, a title that meant he controlled who got in, who got bumped, and who got shown the door. He was mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of permanent tan you get from a salon, not from sunlight. He walked up to Vickers and didn't extend his hand. "Your ticket's been reassigned," Panetti said flatly. "We're issuing you a full refund." Vickers didn't move. His jaw tightened. "Reassigned to who?" "That's not information I can share. You'll have your money back within 5 business days. Now here's where you need to understand what was really going on. Ringside seats for a Tyson fight in 1988 were currency. They were favors. They were power. Casino executives, mob-connected businessmen, politicians, celebrities. They all wanted to be close enough to feel the sweat. And when someone important enough came calling at the last minute, the venue had a quiet practice of bumping civilian ticket holders and replacing them with VIPs. No explanation, no apology, just a refund and a goodbye. Vickers had been bumped so that a casino high roller's nephew could sit ringside and impress his date. But Vickers didn't know that yet. All he knew was that a man in an expensive suit was telling him his ticket, the one he'd spent months saving for, was gone. "I'm not taking a refund," Vickers said. He said it quietly, not aggressive, just final, the way a man speaks when he's already decided. Pinetti's expression didn't change. He'd done this dozens of times. "Sir, the ticket has been reassigned. There's nothing further to discuss. Security will escort you out if necessary." Vickers took one step closer, not threatening, just closing the distance so Pinetti could see his eyes clearly. "I served 2 tours overseas. I took shrapnel in my leg defending this country. I bought that ticket with money I earned. And you're going to stand here and tell me some very important person matters more than the receipt in my pocket?" Pinetti straightened his tie. "I understand your frustration. The refund will be processed. Have a good evening." Then he turned and walked away. Vickers stood there in the lobby. His bad leg was aching. The bus ride had been 11 hours. He had a motel room 4 blocks away that smelled like cigarette smoke and mildew, and he had no ticket. I swear this happened. Most men would have taken the refund and gone home angry. Written a letter, called a lawyer maybe. Vickers did something different. He went back to his motel, opened his duffel bag, and pulled out his dress uniform. The one with every ribbon, every medal, every marker of what he'd done and what he'd survived. He pressed it with the motel iron. He shined his shoes with a washcloth, and the next morning, the morning of fight day, he put it all on and walked back to the venue. He didn't go to the will call window this time. He went straight to the main entrance where the media was setting up, where cameras were being positioned, where the early crowd was starting to gather, and he stood there, right out front. A decorated combat veteran in full dress uniform with a bronze star on his chest and a story to tell to anyone who would listen. It took about 20 minutes before a local reporter noticed him. Then another. Then a camera crew from a regional sports network. Vickers told them everything. Calmly, factually, no drama. He laid out the dates, the purchase confirmation number, the conversation with Pinetti, all of it. He wasn't performing. He was reporting. The way a soldier delivers a briefing. "Now you tell me." The phone started ringing inside that venue about 45 minutes later. The story was hitting local news. A war hero bumped from a Tyson fight so a Casino Wales relative could have his seat. In 1988, with patriotism running hot and military respect at a cultural peak, this was gasoline on dry wood. And it was spreading fast. Pinetti found out when his boss called him screaming. The venue owner, a man who answered to casino interests and had a reputation to protect, told Pinetti to fix it immediately. "Make the soldier happy. Give him his seat back. Give him 2 seats. Give him whatever he wants. Just kill the story." Pinetti sent 2 junior staffers out to find Vickers and bring him inside. They found him still standing out front, still talking to reporters, still calm. They offered him his original seat back plus a second ticket for a guest. Vickers looked at them for a long moment. "I want to hear it from Pinetti," he said. They went back inside. Pinetti refused, said he wasn't going to grovel for a camera. His exact words, according to someone who was in the room, were, "I'm not going out there to kiss some grunt's boots on television." For real. He said that. And one of the staffers who heard it happened to have a brother in the Marines. That staffer walked outside, found the reporter from the regional sports network, and repeated what Pinetti had said. Word for word. On camera. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the story had jumped from local to national. An Associated Press stringer picked it up. Radio stations were running it. And the narrative had shifted from a venue screwing over a ticket holder to a venue executive openly disrespecting a wounded combat veteran. Here's the part that changes everything. Somebody on Tyson's team heard about it. Not a promoter. Not Don King. One of the guys in Tyson's inner circle, a trainer's assistant, a guy who ran errands and kept his ears open. He heard the radio report in the arena parking lot while unloading equipment from a van, and he went straight to the dressing room. Tyson was in pre-fight mode, hands being wrapped, music playing low. The room had that heavy charge it always had before he went to work. This was not a time when people brought outside problems to Mike Tyson. You didn't distract the champion with nonsense hours before a fight. You kept the world out and you let him focus. But this assistant walked in and said, "Mike, there's a soldier outside, a war hero. They took his ticket away. They won't let him in." Tyson's hands stopped moving. He looked up. "What do you mean they took his ticket?" The assistant told him the whole story. The purchase, the bump, Pinetti, the dress uniform, the reporters, the quote about kissing boots. All of it in about 90 seconds. Tyson stood up. The trainer, who was wrapping his hands, tried to guide him back to the chair. Tyson shook him off. He walked to the door of the dressing room, opened it, and told one of the security guards in the hallway to bring him whoever was running the building. Trust me on this. When Mike Tyson in 1988 told you to bring someone to him, that person got brought. It didn't matter if they were in a meeting, on a phone call, or hiding in a bathroom stall. You went and got them. Panetti arrived at the dressing room door 12 minutes later. He'd been told the champion wanted to see him, and he came with his best corporate smile and his hand extended for a shake. Tyson didn't take his hand, didn't invite him to sit, didn't offer pleasantries. "There's a soldier outside," Tyson said. "A guy from my neighborhood. You took his seat." Panetti started his speech. "Mr. Tyson, there was a logistical issue with certain ticket allocations, and we've already offered the gentleman a full resolution, including upgraded seating and complimentary." Tyson cut him off. "Did you call him a grunt?" Panetti's corporate smile collapsed. His face went from confident to caught in about half a second. "That was taken out of context. I was speaking privately and—" "Did you say it?" Panetti swallowed. "It was a poor choice of words. I've already instructed my team to—" "Bring him to me," Tyson said. "Right now. Bring the soldier to this room." Panetti opened his mouth to say something else, but Tyson had already turned his back and sat down in his chair. The conversation was over. There was nothing left to negotiate. Panetti walked out with his expensive suit feeling a little less expensive. You need to understand what was happening inside Tyson's head at this moment. And I'm not going to pretend I can read his mind, but I can tell you what the people in that room saw. They saw a 21-year-old kid from one of the worst neighborhoods in America, a kid who grew up getting robbed on his way to school, who buried friends before he was old enough to drive, sitting in a dressing room worth more than every apartment he'd ever lived in, and hearing that a man from those same streets, a man who'd gone and fought for the country, was being treated like he didn't matter. And something in Tyson's eyes changed. Not rage, not the pre-fight fury that opponents saw right before the lights went out. Something quieter, something older. No word of a lie. 15 minutes later, there was a knock on the dressing room door. A security guard opened it, and Staff Sergeant Raymond Vickers stepped inside. He was still in his dress uniform. His shoes were still shined. His medals were still in perfect alignment. And his right leg was still hurting, but he wasn't limping. Not here, not now. He'd locked that limp down the way soldiers do when they're being watched. Tyson stood up. He crossed the room, and he did something that made every single person in that dressing room stop breathing. He extended his hand and said, "Thank you for your service, brother." That's it. 5 words. But the way he said it, the weight behind it, the sincerity of it from a man who most of the world only saw as a destroyer, it landed in that room and it rearranged the air molecules. Vickers took his hand, gripped it tight, and for about 3 seconds, 2 men from Brownsville who had taken completely different roads through life stood there connected by something that didn't need explaining. Then Tyson said, "You're sitting ringside tonight, right behind my corner, and if anybody in this building gives you trouble, you come find me." He paused. Then he said something that made Vickers' jaw go slack. "After the fight, I want you in this room. I want to hear your stories. I want to hear about what you did over there." Vickers' eyes went glassy. Not crying, just the edge of it. The place where a man who has held himself together through things that would break most people feels the structural supports tremble for just a second. He blinked it back, stood straighter and said, "It would be my honor, champ." But it wasn't over. Here's where the story takes its sharpest turn. Panetti, whether out of spite, stupidity, or some combination, did not seat Vickers ringside. He put him in a mid-level section, row 14, not terrible, but nowhere near what Tyson had promised. Panetti's thinking, as best anyone could reconstruct it later, was that Tyson would be focused on the fight, wouldn't notice where one spectator was sitting, and by the time anyone realized the switch, the event would be over and the problem would dissolve. He miscalculated badly. Tyson came out for the fight. The roar of the crowd hit him. He climbed through the ropes. He looked down at the seats directly behind his corner. Vickers wasn't there. Tyson's trainer saw his head moving, scanning. "What are you looking for?" "The soldier. He's supposed to be right there." Tyson pointed to the empty ringside seats that now held 2 men in polo shirts drinking cocktails and checking their phones. The trainer tried to refocus him. told him to worry about it after the fight. Forget the crowd. Focus on the opponent across the ring who is already bouncing on his toes. This is the gospel truth. Tyson turned to one of his cornermen and said, "Find him. Find the soldier and bring him to those seats before the bell rings, or I'm not fighting." The cornerman looked at the trainer. The trainer looked at the promoter's representative sitting at ringside, and the entire pre-fight machine, the television schedule, the pay-per-view countdown, the millions of dollars ticking on the clock, all of it ground to a stop on the axis of Mike Tyson's demand. Listen to me. This was not a bluff. The people who knew Tyson, who had been around him long enough to read his frequencies, knew with absolute certainty that he meant it. He would have walked out of that ring. He would have blown up the entire card. He would have eaten the lawsuit, the fines, the suspension, all of it, over this. Pinetti was located in the operations booth overlooking the arena. A promoter's assistant arrived out of breath and told him what Tyson had said. Pinetti's face turned the color of old concrete. He'd made a calculated bet that the champion wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. He'd bet wrong against the most volatile, unpredictable force in professional sports. Within 4 minutes, 2 security staffers found Vickers in row 14. They escorted him down the steps, through the very important person corridor, and into the ringside section. The 2 polo shirt guys with the cocktails were quietly moved. Vickers sat down directly behind Tyson's corner. His medals caught the overhead lights. Tyson saw him, nodded once, then turned to face his opponent. The bell rang 8 seconds later. The fight lasted 91 seconds. Tyson came out of his corner with something beyond his usual controlled violence. There was purpose in it now, an audience of one behind him that meant more than the 18,000 others screaming around the arena. He threw a left hook to the body that folded his opponent at the waist, followed it with a right uppercut that separated the man from his consciousness. The referee didn't even count. He just waved it off. 91 seconds, one of the fastest knockouts of Tyson's career. And when the arena erupted, when the cameras rushed in, when the commentators screamed into their microphones, Tyson didn't go to the center of the ring to celebrate. He walked straight to the ropes on his corner side, leaned over, and pointed at Vickers. "That was for Brownsville," he said, just loud enough for Vickers to hear. "Swear on everything." The camera caught it, but the microphones didn't. The only people who heard it were Vickers, one cornerman, and a photographer who happened to be positioned at exactly the right angle. That photographer later said it was the most human moment he ever witnessed at a prize fight. After the ring cleared, after the post-fight interviews, after the commission officials and the doctors and the hangers-on had filtered out, Tyson kept his word. Vickers was brought back to the dressing room. Tyson had changed into sweats. His hands were still taped. He sat down across from Vickers and said, "All right, brother, tell me everything." And Vickers did. He talked about basic training, about his first deployment, about the ambush that earned him his Bronze Star. He told Tyson about the 3 soldiers in his unit who didn't come home. He told him about the shrapnel in his leg, and the surgeons who told him he'd always carry a piece of the war inside his body. He told him about coming back to a country that said it supported the troops but couldn't be bothered to keep a veteran's ticket intact. Tyson listened, didn't interrupt, didn't check the time. For 45 minutes, the baddest man on the planet sat quietly and listened to a soldier tell his story. And then Tyson did something that only 3 people witnessed, and that didn't become public knowledge until years later when one of them finally talked about it in an interview. He reached into his bag, pulled out a personal check, and wrote Vickers a check for $25,000. Vickers shook his head. "Champ, I can't take that." "It's not charity," Tyson said. "It's back pay, from Brownsville, for everything they should have given you when you came home." Vickers looked at the check, looked at Tyson, and then he did something that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. He folded the check and put it in his breast pocket and said, "I'm going to use this to put a down payment on a house, first one anyone in my family has ever owned." Tyson leaned forward and gripped his shoulder. "Good. That's a fact." Vickers used that money exactly as he said he would. He bought a small house in Virginia, near the base where he'd been stationed. He lived in it for the next 2 decades. But the story doesn't end in the dressing room, because Gerald Pinetti's night was just getting started. The venue owner had been watching the entire situation unfold from his private suite. He'd seen the near catastrophe. He'd seen his head of operations almost destroy a multi-million-dollar event over a ringside seat swap that should never have happened. And he'd seen the national media coverage turning his venue into a symbol of corporate greed disrespecting military service. Pinetti was called to the owner's suite at midnight. He walked in expecting damage control, a strategy meeting, talking points for the press. Instead, he found a single sheet of paper on the desk, a termination letter, effective immediately. No severance, no reference. Security would escort him to his office to collect his personal items and then out of the building. Pinetti tried to argue, tried to explain that the seat reassignment was standard practice, that it had been done dozens of times before, that the real problem was the soldier making a spectacle outside the venue. The owner listened for about 30 seconds and then said, "Gerald, you called a Purple Heart recipient a grunt on camera. You defied a direct instruction from our main event fighter. You nearly cost me 8 figures in revenue. And you did all of this because you wanted to impress a Wales 23-year-old nephew. Get your things and get out of my building." Mark my words, Pinetti never worked in venue management again. Not in Atlantic City, not in Vegas, not anywhere. The story followed him. In an industry built on relationships and reputation, he'd burned both down in a single afternoon. The aftermath rippled outward. The regional sports network that first covered Vickers' story ran a full segment the next evening. National outlets picked it up. The narrative was irresistible. Heavyweight champion stops his fight prep to rescue a war hero banned from his own seat by a corporate suit. It was David and Goliath, except David was the most dangerous fighter alive and Goliath was a mid-level venue bureaucrat with a spray tan. If you're watching this right now and this story is hitting you, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. This channel brings you stories like this one every single week, stories that the mainstream forgot but that the people who lived them will never forget. Subscribe and you won't miss the next one. Now, let me tell you what happened in the years after, because the relationship between Tyson and Vickers didn't end that night. Vickers wrote Tyson a letter 3 months later. Handwritten, military precision on the page, straight margins, clean sentences. He thanked Tyson for the seat, for the check, for the conversation. But the line that mattered, the one that Tyson later said he kept in a drawer for years, was this: "You showed me that the kid from Brownsville made it without forgetting where Brownsville is." Tyson wrote back. His handwriting was rougher, the letter shorter, but it was real and it was his. He told Vickers that meeting him reminded Tyson why he fought. Not for the money, not for the belts, for the people who came from where he came from and survived things that should have killed them. They met in person 2 more times after that. Once at a military charity event in Washington where Tyson showed up unannounced and sat in the back row until Vickers spotted him and nearly fell off the stage. And once at Vickers' house in Virginia where Tyson drove up in a rented sedan, sat on the front porch of the house that his check had helped buy, and ate barbecue for 3 hours while Vickers' neighbors tried to figure out why the heavyweight champion of the world was sitting on a lawn chair drinking lemonade on their street. Tyson later said in a rare, unguarded moment during a radio interview that Vickers was one of the few people who ever made him feel like a regular person. Not the champion, not the monster, not the myth, just Mike from Brownsville who happened to be good with his fists. And here's the part that breaks me every time I think about it. In 2003, Vickers was diagnosed with cancer. The shrapnel in his leg, the one the surgeons had left in place, had been slowly leaching toxins into his body for 15 years. The military's official position was that the connection was inconclusive. Vickers' doctors disagreed. Tyson found out through the same grapevine that had connected them in the first place, someone who knew the story. By this time, Tyson's life had gone through its own series of destructions and reconstructions, the losses, the prison time, the financial ruin. He wasn't the same 21-year-old who'd knocked out an opponent in 91 seconds. He was older, heavier, carrying his own invisible shrapnel. But he called Vickers, and according to Vickers' daughter, who spoke about it once in a local newspaper profile, Tyson called every 2 weeks for the next year. Never missed. Sometimes the calls were 5 minutes, sometimes they were an hour. He asked about the treatment, he asked about the house, he asked about Vickers' daughter and whether she was staying in school. On one of those calls, and this is the moment that brings the whole story full circle, Vickers told Tyson that the night of the fight was the best night of his life. Better than his Bronze Star ceremony. Better than his homecoming. Because it was the first time since he'd come back from the war that someone with power had looked at him and said, not in words but in action, "You matter." Tyson went quiet on the line. For a long time, long enough that Vickers asked if he was still there. "I'm here," Tyson said. And that was all he said. Sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is sit in the silence with someone. Vickers died in 2005. He was 51 years old. He was buried in his dress uniform with his bronze star and his Purple Heart pinned to his chest. His daughter said that in his personal effects, in the top drawer of his bedroom dresser, there were 2 items side by side: the folded letter from Mike Tyson and the ticket stub from the fight. Ringside, row 1, seat 7. There was a small funeral, military honors, a flag folded and presented. Among the flowers, one arrangement stood out. No card visible to the congregation, just a spray of white roses. The funeral director later told the family it had been ordered by phone from a man who would only identify himself as a friend from Brownsville. The story of that night in Atlantic City never became a headline. It never went viral because viral didn't exist yet the way it does now. It lived the way the best stories live, passed from mouth to mouth, trainer to trainer, soldier to soldier, from a man who was there to a man who wished he had been. But here's what it really was. Strip away the boxing. Strip away the military decorations. Strip away Panetti and the venue and the politics of ringside seating. What you had was a moment where a man with all the power in the world used it for the exact right reason at the exact right time, not for cameras, not for applause, for a guy from his neighborhood who deserved better than what the world was handing him. Mike Tyson has been called a lot of things: champion, convict, genius, animal, icon, cautionary tale. But on that night in Atlantic City, in a dressing room that smelled like sweat and liniment, he was none of those things. He was just a kid from Brownsville who remembered where he came from. And that, right there, is the legend.